The preference towards Paleozoics over a more generic Pure Frog build has been one of the more interesting things in deck building, for Pure Frog appear to be better at competing against the meta versus Paleozoics, due to Paleos being a little too rigid in those Paleozoic traps. Notwithstanding, Paleozoics have seen a lot more success than what you could classify as pure frogs, but I feel that is only because of popularity. So many more people play Paleozoic frogs than pure frogs. Realistically, most of the paleo traps, when you actually read them, they're just not quality, but take up valuable deck space relative to better choices. Therefore, when I think about what deck to run in order to break out one of the best monsters in the entire game, Toadally Awesome, I always look towards pure frogs over paleo frogs. So let's see what my newest frog deck looks like. For the major frog-related elements of the build, I run the basically mandatory 3 copies of Swap Frog for graveyard dumping and special summoning, 3 copies of Dupe Frog for attack magneting and searching, 2 copies of Flip Flop Frog for bouncing, and 1 copy of Ronintoadin as the important graveyard linker for heavily accelerating Totally Awesome summoning. Now, obviously, if your opponent runs a lot of graveyard removal cards like DD Crow and the whatnot, you probably want to up the copies of Ronintoadin from 1 to 2 in games 2 and 3. Assisting the frogs are some of their aqua brethren in the form of Graydles. 3 copies of Eagle, 1 copy of Alligator, and 1 copy of Slime Jr. Overall, I find that Graydle Eagle is probably the most annoying card in the game that nobody talks about because removing it from the field is typically going to be rather annoying unless you have something to eliminate its graveyard effect. While Totally Awesome is an incredibly powerful and annoying monster in its own right, its one major weakness is its somewhat low attack power. For while 2200 is mighty for a mere rank 2 monster, overall it has some trouble plowing the field on its own. Fortunately for Pure Frog, combining one of the best monsters in the game with another one of the best monsters in the game is rather easy. So definitely 3 copies of Masterpiece. For its power and field clearance are definitely positive attributes for the deck. Finally, closing out the monsters, I run 1 copy of Eater of Millions due to the flexibility of the extra deck, as outside of Totally Awesomes and a couple Mistar Boys, the rest of the spots in the extra deck are pretty much freely available and can be used as simple fodder for summoning Eater of Millions. For the spells, I run my standard 1 copy of Raigeki, 1 copy of Darkhole, and 1 copy of Upstart Goblin for field clearance and some increased consistency and speed. In addition, I run 1 copy of Lightning Vortex for additional field clearance. The discard is actually somewhat helpful most of the time, because you'll be discarding a frog that can then be used by Ronintoadin as fuel for summoning it to the field. You'll discard Ronintoadin, or you'll discard a Graydle that you can just get back with Slime Jr. 2 copies of Twin Twister is nice and help protect Totally Awesome from those nasty counter traps by removing them before they can be activated. 1 copy of Foolish Burial for Ronin or any other frog that you want to use as Ronin fuel, and 1 copy of Monster Reborn for revival flexibility. Finally, closing out the spells, I like running 3 copies of Aquarium Stage. Stage is one of those fantastic cards that does not see any play simply because there are not a lot of decks that can make use of its abilities, in part because its namesake deck only has 3 monsters in it, and probably may never see any more in the future. Stage has 2 very useful effects. First, water monsters cannot be destroyed by battle with non-water monsters, and since almost no meta deck actually runs any water monsters, sans a Gamma Seal, which you'll basically never see on the opponent's side of the field outside of World Chalice, and in that situation, not losing monsters as a result of battle, it's least of your worries. Protecting Totally Awesome and Flip Flop Frog is really made all the easier with this dearth of water monsters. 2, If Stage is sent from the graveyard, not destroyed, but just sent to the graveyard, you can summon one Aqua monster from the grave. This deck is running multiple cards that can send this card to the graveyard without the help of the opponent, which can set up a free Toadally Awesome summons from the graveyard. This, of course, includes the obvious, oh, I have Masterpiece in my hand. Masterpiece plus a newly summoned from the graveyard Toadally Awesome? Yes, please. The Aqua only restriction for the special summons of monsters for the rest of the turn is not a big deal at all. For the traps, I run 3 copies of Torrential Tribute for field clearance and punishing the opponent for overextension when he or she tries to take advantage of the field after Toadally Awesome has used its negation effect. 3 copies of Fiendish Chain for monster effect negation, and masterpiece summoning. 2 copies of Call of the Haunted, which is superior in my eyes to Back to the Front in decks that run Masterpiece. I like 2 copies of Storming Mirror Force for handling flood boards, for while Link monsters may return to the extra deck, the materials used to summon them have been expended, reducing their ability to return to the field in future turns. So the fact that you're bouncing them back to the extra deck, not that big of a deal. Finally, I round out the deck by running 1 copy of what I feel, unless you're running an OTK deck, the obligatory Solemn Judgment. Not surprisingly, while I do not main deck them, I do side 3 copies of Gamma Seal for its water attribute and kaiju antics. Also, I do not run it because of real-world associated costs, but certainly 3 copies of Diagram can be run in this deck, especially for popping a stage and getting that additional summons along with your Masterpiece search. As mentioned before, the extra deck is rather flexible. Outside of some obvious key pieces, I run just various rank 2s and some water-based synchros for use with Slime Jr. and potentially monsters that have been stolen by Graydles. With that said, my extra deck is as followed. 1 copy of Trishula, Dragon of the Ice Barrier, 1 copy of Gungnir, Dragon of the Ice Barrier, 1 copy of White Aura Dolphin, 1 copy of Coral Dragon, 1 copy of Sea Dragon Lord Gishilnodon. This is a water level 5 that you can use with Slime Jr. because, again, Slime Jr. has that. If you summon a Graydle from your graveyard when you normal summon him, you can't summon anything but waters for the rest of the turn. The 3 obligatory Toadally Awesome, the 2 Mistar Boys, 1 Sky Cavalry Centaurea, 1 Daigusto Phoenix, 1 Gachi, which I almost never go into, but I guess it's something to run, 1 Herald of the Pure Light, and 1 number 45. The big issue, some might say, is why aren't you running any Link monsters other than the Mistar Boys? Why? I mean, that would be my question. There isn't a lot of periods of time with this deck where you'd even consider going into a Link monster that's not Mistar Boy, because using the resources to go into that non-Mistar Boy Link monster is just kind of pointless. I guess if you want, you can definitely run Link Kuribos, but again, due to some prohibitory costs, I choose not to do that when considering this deck in the real world. However, with the reprint coming out, perhaps the price of Link Kuribos will plummet to the point where 2 or 3 become quasi-staple in a lot of extra decks, because Link Kuribo is definitely a good card. In the end, and in my experience, I find this type of build to be superior to a Paleozoic-centric frog build, largely because of the greater flexibility of the trap lineup, which is commonly superior to the various Paleozoic traps most Paleozoic players seem almost obligated to run to support the Paleo portion of the theme. Also, there's not a lot of flat trap negation in the game right now. When people put up quote-unquote negate boards, most of the time those negate boards consist of negating monster effects or negating spells, not inherently just negating any cards. And that in part is because traps are still viewed as persona non grata in most decks by most people. The tag team of Toadally Awesome and Masterpiece definitely does quality work in taking and controlling the field. Well, that is my frog deck. Thank you for your attention and your time. I'm out.